morning, everyone. We're going to start Perek Beis of Masechta Middos, which will be page 29 and page 30. And then we're going to go back to taking a look at what we've learned so far and a complete look at the Harabayas and the different Shorim at the Harabayas, the different Shorim at the Azora, and the Rambam, who discusses the different levels of Kedusha in the Harabayas and the Beis Hamikdash. So Perek Beis, we are in Perek Beis. Baruch Hashem, we finished Perek Aleph for this round. Perek Sheni, page 29. What we're going to be focusing on is on diagram 4. Diagram 4 should look like this. So to remind everybody, this outer wall, the first wall, is the wall of the Harabayas. It surrounds Harabayas. Between the Harabayas and the Beis Hamikdash itself is this first square that we learned about, the Ezras Noshim. When we say Azora, it does not include this Ezras Noshim. We'll see that today in the Halacha in the Rambam. We learned about going into the Ezras Noshim, 15 steps through the Shara Nikanor. You walk through Shara Nikanor, and now you're in the Azora. And we learned that the Harabayas has 5 openings. So let's get the directions here. On this picture, this is Mizrach, east. So here there would be the gate to walk into the Harabayas of Shushan Habira. Okay. Here to the north, got to get my finger in the right place, I'm sorry. Here to the north, there was one opening called Shar Teddy. We learned about that yesterday, about a Kohen who became Tomei would walk out this gate. The southern wall of the Harabayas had 2 gates, Shari Hulda, and the west had 1 gate, Kupunus. This is all about the 5 outer gates. We learned about 7 gates in the Azora. There were more gates to the Azora, but we learned about the 7 main ones. And again, of the 7 main ones, Levium guarded 5 of those 7. So the Kohanim guarded in 3 places with a Levi assisting. Levium guarded in 21 places, and that's the 5-4-5-4 rule. This is what we're going to be looking at today in the next Mishnah. And I'm going to hold it up as we read the Mishnah so we can get an appreciation of what we're talking about. Hopefully everyone has diagram number 4. So the Mishnah, page 29, says, Harabayas hoya chamesh meos amal chamesh meos amal. The Harabayas, this large area, besides the Beis Hamikdash. Beis Hamikdash is constructed only on a part of the Harabayas. The Harabayas in total was 500 amos by 500 amos. If you would measure it today, it would be much larger. That's because there was a Har Chava done. There's Hordis that excavated more area. We're not going to take a look at that today, but we will take a look at the Harabayas today. So the Harabayas in its original dimension was 500 amos by 500 amos. And this Mishnah is now going to describe to us how much of that 500 amos was taken up by the structure of Beis Hamikdash. Rubo min Hadoro. Most of the open space of the Harabayas is on the south side. You can see from the walls of the Beis Hamikdash until the wall of the Harabayas, there's quite a bit of room. We'll take a look at how much in a moment. But the largest open space on the Harabayas is on the southern side of the Harabayas. Sheni Lo, the second most open space on the Harabayas, Min HaMizrach, is here, between the eastern wall of Harabayas and the wall of the Ezras Noshim, had the second most open space. Shalishi Lo Min HaTzafon, the third most open space, is between the northern wall of the Harabayas and the wall of the Beis Hamikdash. Miuto, the least space, fourth place, the least open space on Har HaBayis, Min Hamaru, was between the western wall of the Har HaBayis, and there was a little space between the western wall of the Har HaBayis and the back wall of the Beis Hamikdash, or of the Azorah. Okay, so the most open space is on the southern side of the Har HaBayis. Next most open space is east. Next is north, and the least open space of Har HaBayis is behind the western wall of the Har HaBayis, and the wall of the Azorah is the least open space on the Har HaBayis. The Mishnah continues, Makom shehayarov midaso, shom hayarov tashmisho. The place that had the most open space is the place that was most used. And we'll learn about that later, not today. Because the southern side of the Har HaBayis had the most open space, it therefore was able to serve different purposes. And as we learned, each wall of the Har HaBayis, east, north, west, had only one gate. There were two gates on the southern wall of the Har HaBayis, Sharei Hulda. There were two gates there. One of the reasons is because of the flow of people in and out. This is where people would go in and out. It was the most open space. It could hold the most people on Har HaBayis, and therefore there were two gates there, according to one explanation. So that's Perek Beis Mishnah Aleph. Now, if we take a look at the picture itself, we did some of this math already. The pictures actually showing you numbers right now. I'm going to look at the picture. Hopefully you have the diagram in front of you. We just said in the Mishnah that the whole Har HaBayis is 500 by 500. We know that the structure itself, the width of the Beis Hamikdash is 135. If the structure of the Beis Hamikdash takes up 135 amos in width, and the entire width is 500, that leaves you 365 amos of open space in the width. How was that divided? So the picture shows you that between the Har HaBayis wall and the Beis Hamikdash wall, there is 265 amos here. So now you have 265 amos of open space on the southern side, 135 amos of the Beis Hamikdash itself. You're now at 400. And from the Azorah wall, that's now on the northern side, until the Har HaBayis wall, you only have 100 amos left. So you have 265, 135, and 100. That's your 500 amos in width of the Har HaBayis. The length of the Har HaBayis is also 500 amos. And how is that divided? So if you look at your picture again, it shows you, as we mentioned, it shows you 265 in width, 135 Beis Hamikdash, and 100 again in width on the northern side. If we look from the eastern side, this whole structure, the Azorah, not including this yellow goldish wall. The yellow goldish wall is just to depict for you the Ezras Noshim, which we said does not include the word Azorah. Azorah, which is the white enclosure, is 187 amos in length. The Ezras Noshim is 135 amos in length, which means the Ezras Noshim is a square. It's 135 by 135. So you add 187 plus 135. I don't know what you get offhand. I had it written down somewhere, but I don't know what that is. 187 in length of the white structure, 135 in length of the Ezras Noshim. Whatever remainder you now have is going to be the remainder of the length of Har HaBayis. And the way it was split, as you can see in the picture, it shows you a number, 115 amos from the eastern wall of Har HaBayis until you got to the wall of the Ezras Noshim, 115. And now you take 115 from the wall of the eastern wall of the Har HaBayis to the wall of the Ezras Noshim. 115. Then you add the Ezras Noshim, which is 135. I believe that gives you about 135, and 115 should give you 250. And now you have the length of the white enclosure, which is the Azor, which is 187. So you have 250 plus 187. You're somewhere about 430 something. 250, 350, 450, 437, approximately something like that. And the rest is now between the back wall, this white in the Azara, the back wall of the Azara, until the western wall of the Harabais is whatever is left, which is something like 66 or 67 amos. In the picture, it shows you, let's see what it says. Shows you 63. Okay, so my math is a little off. So you have going from the eastern wall, from the southern wall to the wall of the Beis Hamikdash, you have 265, 135 width of Beis Hamikdash, and 100 between the northern wall of the Beis Hamikdash and the northern wall of Harabais. You have 100. Total, 265, 135, 100, 500 in width. In length, you have 115 amos from the eastern wall of Harabais until you get to the wall of the Ezras Noshim. The Ezras Noshim is 135. You have now 187 in length inside the white structure Azora, and the remainder is 63 amos, which is behind the wall of the Azora until you get to the western wall of the Harabai. So it's 500 by 500, including the structure of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Mishnah said, now we can look at the Mishnah again on page 29. The Mishnah says the most open space on Harabayas is the south, 265. Sheni lo min hamizrach. The second most open space is the eastern side, which has 115. Shlishi min hatzafon. The next open space in terms of amount is on the northern side, and that is 100. Okay. And the least space, miutai min hamayrav. The least open space on Harabayas is on the western side, between the wall of the Harabayas and the back wall of the Azara is, according to the math done here, if I see it correctly, it says 63 amos. Okay. So that's our Mishnah for today. We're going to now go back and take a look at the Beis Hamikdash on the Har Habayis. I believe yesterday we sent out diagram number 11. Now, I want to emphasize that this picture is a depiction. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It comes from a very authoritative sefer on the Harabayas. There's nothing halachic about this picture for us for the time being, but it superimposes from an aerial view the Beis Hamikdash on Harabayas. Okay, and that's diagram 11. So you see there are red lines, and there's notes about where you can go, cannot go on the Harabayas. It's not our discussion for today because we're not ready for it yet. We still have to learn quite a few halachas. But this is where I'm pointing my finger. It's a make-believe Har Hazesim, which we talk about. Our perspective is always from Har Hazesim east to west. So you walk down Har Hazesim, you came to this wall, and that's the wall of the Har Habayis. And that's the eastern gate. You would enter the eastern gate, which is Shushan Habira, and then you would come to this first square. Rabbi say, what's the first square? Ezras Noshim. So you have the Ezras Noshim in gold. You walked into the Ezras Noshim, and you see the white, that's the 15 steps to go into Sha'ar Nicanor. You went into Sha'ar Nicanor, and you're now in the Azara. This blue is what we call Azara. We keep on saying that the Ezras Noshim is not part of the concept right now for halachic purposes of Azara. Ezras Noshim is in gold, 135 by 135. the Azora, which has the chamber called Ulam for us. That's that rectangular building. And behind that was the Heichal. Inside the Heichal, there was the Kodesh, the Holy, in which there was on the southern side, the menorah. On the northern side, the Shulchan with the Lechem Aponim, which is in this week's Parsha Lechem Aponim. On the western side, there was the Parohes, or a different kind of partition. And behind that was the Orim. This blue structure is again 135 in width, and as we mentioned, 187 in length. So this is now the Har HaBayis. They're showing you the outer lines of the Har HaBayis. Those are the outer lines of Har HaBayis. And they've superimposed the Beis HaMikdash on the Har HaBayis. And that would be an aerial view according to where we believe, Lafi Rov Shitas, where the Beis HaMikdash would have been and will be B'Meher B'Yameinu. That's what it would look like. There's a red dot right here. And it says on top of the red dot, Shar Hillel, or what they call the Mugrabi Gate. We know the Mugrabi Gate as coming to the Kosel Maravi, and then there's a ramp that goes all the way up, because the Har HaBayis, as we know, is on an incline. So the Mugrabi Gate is on the western wall of the Har HaBayis, the Kosel Maravi. And this picture showing you what we call Shar Hillel, and today is called the Mugrabi Gate. If you go up that ramp and go through the Mugrabi Gate, where are you? You're on the western side of the Har HaBayis. And as we just learned, the western side of the Har HaBayis had not that much room to it before you finally got to what we call the Azora. So that's the Mugrabi Gate that we all see when we go to the Kosel. But that's on the western side. This is our view from the eastern side. Ezra's Noshim, Shar Nicanor, and the Azora. Okay, this is the eastern side. This is the northern side, the southern side. Here there would be the two doors of Hulda. Here would be Shushan Habira. On the northern side, you would have Shar Tedi. And on the western side, you would have had Kipunus. Okay. We're going to come back to this picture after we learn some halachas, but not today. We're going to come back to this picture and other pictures like this that give us a depiction of where the Beis HaMikdash is on the Har HaBayis and how much room there is around the Beis HaMikdash on the Har HaBayis. To understand Har HaBayis and the Beis HaMikdash, we have to go to diagram 10. That's your diagram 10. The way the Har HaBayis and the Beis HaMikdash are set up are a replica of the way the Jews lived in the Midbar with Moshe Rabbeinu. We know from Psukim in Bamidbar, and the Gemara explains this in detail. There were three machanot, there were three camps in the desert. Machane Yisrael, where the Jewish people, the 12 tribes, lived. Then there was Machane Leviah, where the Levium lived. We'll get to that in a moment. And then inside was the Machane Shechina. That's where the Mishkan was. The three machanot, the three camps, Yisrael, Leviah, Shechina. If you look at this diagram, it's been used quite often. It's torn, Baruch Hashem, and it's got tape on it. So it's holding itself together, Baruch Hashem, but it's been well used. You have three Shvatim, three tribes on each side. And as we know, each tribe had a flag. So it's showing you the Golan, 12 tribes. And they're encamped. So when the Jewish people, the Anan HaKavod, stopped in a place in the Midbar, they knew that they should unpack and set up the Machane. And they encamped this way. And in Bamidbar, it tells us what Shvatim were on the north, which Shvatim were the south, which Shvatim were the east, which Shvatim were the west. Those are psukim in the Torah. We don't have to be concerned about that right now. This area, the outer area where the Jewish people lived in their 12 Shvatim camps, the whole camp is called Machane Yisrael. That's the first Machane. You walked further in, and on the four sides, in the middle of all this is the Mishkan. So Machane Yisrael encircles the Mishkan from the outside. You walk from Machane Yisrael, and you keep on walking, you're going to get to Machane Leviah, an area where the Levium lived. Who are the Levium? There are 4 camps of Levium. Each camp is on a different side of the Mishkan. There's the Machane. How many children did Levi have that became Levium? Gershon, Kahas, and Merari. Kahas is Moshe Rabbeinu's Zaidi. Kahas had a son, Amram. Amram had Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Amram and Yocheved had Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Moshe and his family are Levium. Aaron became the family of Kohanim. So you have 3 families of Levium: Gershon, Kahas, and Merari. Moshe Rabbeinu comes from Kahas, but he and his children were not in the camp with Kahas. They were in the camp with Aaron. So there are 4 camps around the Mishkan itself, which is called Machane Leviah. One is for Gershon, one is for Kahas, one is for Merari, and one is for Moshe, Aaron, and Aaron's sons. So again, the Mishkan is in the center of Jewish life. It's the center of Jewish life. On the outskirts of the central point Mishkan, we have the 12 Shvatim. That's Machane Yisrael. You came closer to the Mishkan and you entered Machane Leviah. Around Machane Leviah, there's Gershon family, Kahas family, Merari family, and Moshe, Aaron, and his children. If you walk through Machane Leviah, you were able to enter the Mishkan at the right time, under the right circumstances. You're able to enter the Mishkan. So there are 3 camps. This is critical to understand the Har HaBayis and the halachas of the Har HaBayis and the Beis HaMikdash. The outskirt camp is called Yisrael. The next camp is around the Mishkan, Leviah, and the Mishkan itself is called Machane Shechin. Now let's take a look at diagram 4 again. Those 3 machanos that we just talked about were replicated in Yerushalayim. This is Gemara. This was replicated in Yerushalayim. The dark area in the diagram is the city of Yerushalayim itself. Perhaps we have an earlier picture. I think we sent this out as a diagram. Here's a picture. Okay. Outside the walls of the Har HaBayis, there was a city. People were living there. Outside the wall of the Har HaBayis is camp number 1, Machane Yisrael. Yerushalayim itself was enclosed by a wall. Once you entered that wall, you were in something called Machane Yisrael. And the wall of Yerushalayim and where it is very important because Kodshe Kalim, the lower level Karbonis, can be eaten anywhere inside the wall of Yerushalayim. So for example, a korban Pesach can be eaten anywhere inside the wall of Yerushalayim. So you need to know where the wall of Yerushalayim is. You cannot eat kachum kalam outside the wall of Yerushalayim. So there's the wall around the city. Inside that wall is what we call Machane Yisrael. That's the Machane that is analogous to the Machane Yisrael of the 12 tribes in the Midbar. 12 tribes in the Midbar and the outskirts, and Jewish people living inside the wall of Yerushalayim. That's Machane Yisrael. The next place you came to, we said in the diagram, came to Machane Leviah, where Gershom, Kahos, and Merari lived, and Moshe, Aaron, Ubano. Well, what's the next place you come to after you enter the city of Yerushalayim? You go through that wall. You keep on walking, you come to the wall of the Harabayas, which means when you enter the Harabayas, you're now in the second camp. What's the second camp? Levi. The Harabayas is Machane Leviah. And then you keep on going towards the Beis HaMikdash. We're going to get to the Ezras Noshim. This is where it becomes critical to distinguish between Ezras Noshim and Azorah. The Azorah, going back to our picture, the Azorah is Machane Shechina. So let's use this diagram for a moment. You're outside this wall. You're in the city of Yerushalayim. You're outside the wall of the Harabayas. You're in the city of Yerushalayim. You're in Machane Yisrael. You enter Sha'ar Shushan Habira, or one of the other 4 gates, and now you're in Har Habayis, the open area of Har Habayis, and that's Machane Leviah. We'll discuss what happens when you go into Ezras Noshim in several minutes. This Azorah is now Machane Shechina. So the city of Yerushalayim, the Harabayas, and the Beis HaMikdash replicate the 3 Machanot in the Midbar. Now let's go back for a moment to diagram 10. The camps in the Midbar. The 12 Shvatim are on the outskirts. Moshe, Aaron, and his children, Gershom, Kahas, and Merari, are on the 4 sides of the Mishkan, and that's called Machane Leviah. What did Moshe carry with him during the 40 years of the Midbar? It says in Pashas B'Shalach, "Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imo." Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him out of Mitzrayim, because Yosef made his brothers swear that after he dies, they would take his bones to Eretz Yisrael, which they couldn't do immediately because they were enslaved. And the pasuk in Pashas B'Shalach says, "Vayikach Moshe atzmos Yosef imo." Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him. Now, what did he do with it after he built the Mishkan? He kept it with him. He had the Aron of Yosef with him. Yosef had passed on. He was Nifter. He was in an Aron. And Moshe is taking care of that Aron where? He is right around the Mishkan in the Machane Leviah. He has a dead body with him in Machane Leviah. And from here, the Gemara tells us, we'll see in the Rambam in a moment, that in Machane Leviah, not only can someone who's been defiled by a dead body enter, but you can actually bring a dead body into the Machane Leviah. You may not want to, but there's no punishment of any kind whatsoever. There's no prohibition to bring a dead body or a person who's been defiled by a dead body to come into Machane Leviah. You cannot go into the Azorah. We'll talk about the Ezras Noshim in a moment. So, Going back to our diagram 11, you're allowed to have, let's leave the dead body. Let's talk about a person who's become defiled through a dead body, which we call a tamei meis. You're outside the Har HaBayis wall, you're in Yerushalayim. You can walk into the city of Yerushalayim when you're a tamei meis. You walk in one of the 5 gates to the Har HaBayis and the open area of the Har HaBayis, and you're tamei meis. Not a problem. Okay, we're going to see this in the Rambam. So again, we need to clarify that from our old, the things that we were told when we were children that we need to change. Like we go through so many examples. The Torah, the luchos weren't given on the 6th day of Sivan. Okay? They were given on Shiva B'Tammuz and broken. The things that we were taught, whether because we're making pictures before Shavuos of the luchos for our parents. There are no luchos on Shavuos. The luchos are on Shiva B'Tammuz. On the 6th day of Sivan, the Jews stood around Matan Torah and heard the 10 dibros. Moshe went up for 40 days and 40 nights, got the luchos, came down on Shiva B'Tammuz and broke them. That's one of the reasons we fast on Shiva B'Tammuz. So there are certain concepts we got as children that we need to sort of their child concepts. That's the way we teach children. Shavuot, a very big day. We got the luchos. We didn't get the luchos. Okay, when we get a little older, we need to know these things. We can't go to the Har HaBayis because we're all tamei meis and we don't have a parah aduma to take care of it. Whether you can or cannot go on the Har HaBayis is a separate discussion. But if the reason you can't go on the Har HaBayis is because someone's tamei meis, that is not the reason you can't go on the Har HaBayis. Okay. Now, some people say you can't go on the Har HaBayis because we don't know exactly where the Azorah is. Maybe it was here, maybe it was here, maybe it was here, maybe it was here. So you can't go anywhere on the Har HaBayis because you're a tamei meis. We're going to leave that right now alone. This depiction is based upon a Kabbalah that we have from a lot of poskim going back to the days of Rishonim, from the sources, that the dome of the rock that's underneath the dome of the rock, is the Even Shasiyah. It is the place of the Kodesh Kadoshim. It is the Even Shasiyah that's described in the Gemara in Yuma as the place of the Kodesh Kadoshim. Using the dome of the rock and the place where the rock is as the Kodesh Kadoshim, once you know that that's the place of the Kodesh Kadoshim, you can build the whole Beis HaMikdash around that. If I know for sure, or I accept the fact that the Even Shasiyah underneath the dome of the rock is the Kodesh Kadoshim, then I have all the measurements I need from Masechta Middos to go to the east, the west, the north, and south. I can build the whole Beis HaMikdash around it and create this depiction. Once I create this depiction, we just learned measurements about the Har HaBayis, and of course there was a Har Chava, but from those measurements, I now have a basic understanding of how big the area of Har HaBayis is that does not include the Beis HaMikdash. So that's where this depiction comes from. So let's go to the Rambam now. We need 2 introductions. We talked about tamei meis. Of course, a tamei meis is tamei for at least 7 days. He has to have the parah aduma ash sprinkled on him on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and then he has to go to the mikveh. And there are other kinds of tumas. We're not going to go through all the tumas, nida, zav, zava, metzora. They're all different kinds of levels of tumah. There is a tumah that when you go to the mikveh, you become something which we call a tavul yoim, meaning a Kohen came into contact today with a dead rat, a sheretz, a dead sheretz that defiles the person. The Kohen cannot eat truma now. First Mishnah Brachas. The Kohen has to go to the mikveh. So he just came into contact with the sheretz, and it's 10:35. He goes to the mikveh, and 11 o'clock in the morning, he comes out of the mikveh. He still can't eat truma. He has to have something called Herav Shemesh. Okay? He has to wait till nightfall tonight. After nightfall tonight, he can eat truma again. The period of time between his going to the mikveh at 11 a.m. and nightfall tonight, assuming it's 8 p.m., during that period of time, he's gone to the mikveh. He hasn't gone through a sunset. We'll call it now a sunset, but it's more than sunset. It says kachavim. He's called a Tvul Yom. He's in a semi-state of tumah. He's gone to the mikveh, but the sun has not set on his tumah yet. During those hours, he's called a Tvul Yom. One. Then there are certain tumas that are very, very chomor, and those tumas require the person to go to the mikveh the day after he brings a carbon. He's going to bring a carbon. In other words, he went to the mikveh, and sometimes he has to go to the mikveh twice, like a mitzorah. We're not going to go into that, but there are some tumas that are very, very severe and require the person to bring a carbon. So, for example, if he went to the mikveh tonight or tomorrow morning, again, let's not get into all the complexities of which tumah is which and how many times you go to the mikveh. But those who have to bring a carbon and have not yet brought the carbon, they've been to the mikveh, they have had sunset. In other words, the person went to the mikveh today, the sun has set this evening. He still can't go into the Beis HaMikdash until he brings a carbon tomorrow. You can't bring a carbon at night. So he went to the mikveh today. We're not talking about sheretz now. We're talking about a more severe tumah. He's gone to the mikveh at 11 a.m. today. The sun set. The stars came out tonight at 8. He still cannot go into the Beis HaMikdash. The first case, a Kohen who came into contact with a sheretz at 11 a.m., he went to the mikveh. He's now called a Tvul Yom until 8 o'clock at night. That Tvul Yom has certain rules we'll see in the Rambam. During those hours from 11 a.m., he went to the mikveh, and 8 p.m., when the stars come out, he's a Tvul Yom. He's not fully tahor. In fact, he cannot eat truma. And there are parts of the harabayas he can go into, and parts he can't go into because he's a Tvul Yom. But what happens if this person became tamei through something more severe than sheretz? He went to the mikveh at 11, sunset tonight, but he has to still bring a carbon tomorrow. That person is called a mechusar kippurim. He lacks the carbon. That's a different level of tumah. The first level of tumah, the person has gone to the mikveh, he's waiting for evening, he's waiting for nightfall. That's called a mechusar kippur, that's called a Tvul Yom. The person who's gone to the mikveh, the sun has set and the stars have come out post the mikveh, but he still has to bring a carbon tomorrow. He's called a mechusar kippur. Now we're ready to take a look at the Rambam. The Rambam was sent out as a handout, I believe, 2 days ago. And this is Rambam Hilchos Beis HaBchira Perek Zayin. And the Rambam's explaining what's called, and I believe the handout, I called the handout Eser Kedushos. The Mishnah says that Eser Kedushos, there are 10 Kedushos in Eretz Yisrael. Okay? And as you go closer and closer to the Beis HaMikdash, you're going to higher and higher levels of Kedusha. So Yerushalayim has a certain Kedusha. We're not going to read that Rambam. That's the Rambam in Hilchos Beis HaBchira, Perek Zayin Halacha Yudal. The first Rambam, the first words of the Rambam are Yerushalayim Mekudeshes Mishar HaYores HaMokafas Choma. Okay, he discusses the special Kedusha inside Yerushalayim. He's not talking about Harabayas. You've entered the wall of Yerushalayim. You haven't gone to the Harabayas yet. This is the Kedusha that Yerushalayim has, things you can or cannot do inside the walls of the city itself. Now we're going to take a look at Halacha Tesvav. Har Habayis. You're now on the Har Habayis. Okay, going back to diagram 11, you entered one of the 5 gates. Either you've come up through the eastern gate, Shushan Habira. You've come up through the northern gate, Teddy, which wasn't usual. That was the gate for the Kohanim who became Tomei, the northern gate. The western gate, Kipunus, or one of the 2 southern gates of Chulda. So you now enter the Harabayas. Harabayas is another step forward towards the Beis Hamikdash. So the Harabayas is going to have a higher level of Kedusha and sanctity than the city of Yerushalayim. What can't you do there? So the Rambam says, Harabayas, that open area on the Harabayas, enclosed by the walls of the Harabayas, but not yet the structure of Beis Hamikdash, Makudash Mimena, it's holier than the city of Yerushalayim, She'ein Zavin v'Zavod, Nidot v'Yoldot Nechnosam L'Sham. A man who's a Zav, Tumas Zav, a woman who's a Tumas Zava, a Nida, a woman who gave birth, she's Tuma, Tomei, Tumas Yuledes, before all these people go through their purification process, while they're Zav, Zava, Nida Yoledes, Nechnosam L'Sham. You're not allowed, those people cannot go onto the Harabayas itself. So a Nida, a Zava, a Zav, cannot, a Zav, a Zava, a Nida, and Yoledes can enter the city of Yerushalayim, but cannot enter inside the Harabayas. Now the Rambam couldn't say this more clearly because he can't change it. The Gemara says Moshe had bones of Yosef with him in Machna Leviah. And what's the Har Habayis? Machna Leviah. You're allowed to bring in a dead body to the Har Habayis itself, not the Beis Hamikdash, Har Habayis. And of course, I don't even have to tell you that if a dead body can be brought to the Har Habayis, someone who came in contact with a dead body can go into the Har Habayis. So if you know exactly where the Har Habayis is, and you know exactly where the Beis Hamikdash is, so you can be careful not to enter Beis Hamikdash territory, the fact that you are defiled Tamei Meis and have no Parah Aduma ash does not stop you from going on the Har Habayis. The Rambam's clear. The Gemara is clear. Moshe Rabbeinu was clear. He had the Atzmos Yosef with him in Machna Leviah, and the Har Habayis open area is Machna Leviah. Hachel. Now remember we learned about the Chel. I'll pull out the diagram for you. As an example, diagram 7. It's showing you the Chel. The Chel is the place that we spoke about, that there was a small wall that had signs on it. And the sign said, Goyim cannot go past this point. And that wall, okay, or you can use this picture, picture 3. Harazesim. This is diagram number 3. Harazesim. You walk into the Ezras Noshim from the east. 15 steps, Shar Nikanor. And then you're in the Azorah. You see this outer wall here, the first wall on this picture, is the Soreg. That's the little wall that was erected, and on the Soreg, it said Gentiles cannot go past this point. Between this outer wall called Soreg, and a picture of the sign was sent out courtesy of Meir and Atorah Beck. They had a link that was sent out. There's actually in a museum a copy, not a copy, actual stone that has the inscription, Gentiles may not go beyond this point. This is the wall that had those signs on it. It's all around the Beis Hamikdash. That's the Soreg wall. Between the Soreg wall and this darker wall, which is now the wall of Beis Hamikdash, is an area called Chel, and that's what the Rambam is describing now. HaChel, this area of Chel, Mekudesh Mimena, it's holier than the Har Habayis. The area outside the Chel is Har Habayis. So we said that in this area, a Nida, a Zav, Zava, and the Yoledes cannot enter this area, Har Habayis. But for example, someone who was defiled through a mess, he's Tomei mess, he can enter this area, it's Har Habayis. A goy can enter this area, it's Harabayas. Now you come to this small wall called Soreg. And there's 10 amos between the Soreg and the wall of the Beis Hamikdash. Hachil mekudesh mimeno she'ein akum utame mes ubo al nida nechnasim l'sham. From this point of from the Soreg until the Chayil, there it's holier. A guy can't go past that point, which is what we mentioned. Someone who became defiled through a mess can't go through that point. A boil nida, someone who had relations with a nida, separate subject, he's tummy. He cannot enter that point. So this is a holier place now. Okay. The goy, for example, or someone who's a tummy mess, he entered the city of Yerushalayim. He went through the wall, one of the gates of the Harabayas. He's okay. The goy and the tummy mess are both okay. But once he gets to that low wall, was about 10 tefachim, I believe it was 10 tefachim high, we'll see it later in the Mishnah. He comes to that soreg, that's it. The tummy mace and the goy cannot go beyond that. So again, if we go back to our depiction of the Beis Hamikdash on the Harabayas, 11, a tummy mace today can enter the Harabayas. What does he have to be careful of? He has to make sure he doesn't go anywhere that's near the Chayil. That's the area, the first area tummy mace cannot go into. He can enter the Harabayas, but he must know where the Chayil is, otherwise he cannot go in. If you take a look at the picture, number 11, closely, you'll see that there is a red line, and outside the red line it says Chayil. So according to this depiction of the book, that's the Chayil. And there's plenty of open area beyond the Chayil where a Tamei Mes would be allowed to go. The Rambam now says in Halacha Yud Zayin, we keep on talking about the fact, going back to picture 3, that the Ezras Noshim is its own halachic status. It's not part of the Azorah. You can see the Azorah is where the outer Mizbeach was to sacrifice animals. It's the place where the Shulchan, Menorah, and Mizbeach HaKtoros were in the Heichal. It's where the Oren was in the Kodesh Kodashim. This outer room, this outer, bigger than a room, this outer courtyard is the Ezras Noshim, where they had the Simcha space, Hashoeva, Levium standing on these 15 steps, singing the Shir Malos. This outer area, this outer courtyard is Ezras Noshim. We do not use the word Azorah here because Azorah has its own halachas. And now the Rambam, you see how he's working. The Rambam taught us about the city of Yerushalayim. He then taught us about the Harabayas. He then taught us about the Chayil. Now it's as if the Rambam's entering the Beis Hamikdash through the eastern gate. You entered Yerushalayim from the east. What you can do there? You now enter the Harabayas from the east. And if you did that, you came to the Chayil. No Tamei Meis, no Goy. You're now ready to go into the Ezras Noshim. Rambam says, Ezras Noshim, Mikudeshes min HaChayil. The Ezras Noshim is holier than that Chayil area. Who can't go in there? She'ein Tavul Yom Nichnas L'Sham. A Tavul Yom, our Kohen, who touched the Sheretz, who went to the mikveh at 11 in the morning, and he has to wait till nightfall at 8 at night. During those 9 hours, he is a Tavul Yom. He went to mikveh, he was toivel himself, but he has to wait until nightfall. During those 9 hours, a person that has the status of a Tavul Yom cannot enter the Ezras Noshim. And certainly, he can't go into the Azorah. So the Tavul Yom was allowed to be in the Chayil, but he couldn't enter the Ezras Noshim. HaChayil Mekudesh Ezras Noshim Halach Yud Zayin Mekudeshes min HaChayil she'ein Tavul Yom Nichnas L'Sham. The Rambam now adds V'isu zeh midivreim. This is a rabbinic prohibition that the Kohen who would toivel and has to wait to nightfall a Tavul Yom It doesn't have to be a Kohen. A Jew who's not a Kohen could be a Tvul Yom. I just gave you a simple example of a Tvul Yom. The Tvul Yom is really allowed to go in this area. If you imagine that this area, this courtyard, which we call Ezras Nashim, was not there, just pull it off the Har HaBayis. What do you have? Har HaBayis. But this structure was built there. Why it came there, how it came there is a separate discussion, not today. And that's why we call it Ezras Nashim, not Azorah. This is the official Azorah. This Ezras Nashim was built, and if it wasn't built and it was just left open, it would be simply part of the Har HaBayis. And the Har HaBayis, a Tavul Yom is allowed to go on the Har HaBayis. And a Tomei Meis is allowed to go on the Har HaBayis. However, because this was built and it's right next to the real Azorah, Midrabanan, they made it holier, and they said that a Tvul Yom cannot, while the Tvul Yom can go on the Har HaBayis, the Tvul Yom can go in the Chel, he cannot go in the Ezras Nashim. That's why the Rambam says the Ezras Nashim, Isuzemi Devrehem, a Tvul Yom cannot go into the Ezras Nashim Midrabanan, Aval Min HaTorah, but as far as the Torah is concerned, Mutal Tvul Yom Likones Lamachan Leviyah. The Rambam now uses the words Machna Leviyah. Again, if I remove this courtyard and I don't build it at all, what's underneath that courtyard? The whole Beis HaMikdash is built on the Har HaBayis. The Azorah takes special Kedusha on the Har HaBayis. If I don't build the Ezras Nashim, what do I have here? Har HaBayis. And what do we call Har HaBayis? Machna Leviyah. So this is Machna Leviyah, if not for the Ezras Nashim. And in a Machna Leviyah, a person who came into contact with a dead body can go there, and a Tavul Yom can go there. However, because this was built, rabbinically, they gave it a Kedusha, and they gave it the Kedusha of semi-Azorah. The Azorah is going to be even more holy, which we'll see in a moment. So here, a Tavul Yom, during that 9 hours after mikvah and before nightfall, a Tvul Yom cannot enter this place. But underneath this place called Ezras Nashim is Min HaTorah, is Har HaBayis, and Har HaBayis is Machna Leviyah. Utame mei shenichnas le'Ezras Nashim eino chayev karas. A person that enters this area, Azorah, the Azorah, and he's Tomei Mes, and he does it intentionally, he's chayev karas, he's chayev a heavenly death. But if a person who is a Tomei Mes intentionally enters the Ezras Nashim, he's not chayev karas. Why is he not chayev karas? Because this area is not Azorah. This area is Har HaBayis. And on Har HaBayis, which is Machna Leviyah, Moshe had Yosef's bones. So therefore, you can have a dead body here. And if you came into contact with a dead body, you can be here. It's just rabbinically, they said, we're going to give this a holiness since it's connected to the Azorah. Therefore, we don't want someone who came into contact with a dead body to go into the Chayil or into the Ezras Nashim. We don't want it to Tavul Yom to go in there. But what happens if a person who's a Tomei Meis intentionally walked into the area which is Ezras Nashim? He's not allowed to do that. Chas v'sholom. But the Rambam is telling us if he did it, he's not chayev karas, because this Ezras Nashim is sitting on the Har HaBayis, and Har HaBayis is Machna Leviyah. Machna Leviyah does not turn into Machane Shechina, that third Machane. The city of Yerushalayim is Machane Yisrael. The Har HaBayis is Machna Leviyah. The Ezras Nashim biblically is Machna Leviyah. The Rabbanim gave it a special Kedusha. The third Machane Shechina is the Azorah. After you walk through Shar Nikanor, 15 steps up, through the Shar Nikanor, you're now in Azorah. That's where the chorus, the heavenly death, clicks in for a person who Chas v'Sholom goes into the Azorah while he's Tomei. So that's where we'll stop for today, because we haven't learned the next areas that the Rambam discusses. So that's what we have for today. We have the city, going back now to diagram 11, aerial view. We have the city of Yerushalayim. You walk through a gate to get into Yerushalayim. Whatever the prohibitions in Yerushalayim are, we didn't learn that today, but they have nothing to do with us with Tumah. A person who's a Zav, a woman Zav, a Nida Yoledes, can walk into the city of Yerushalayim. Of course, there's a big exception, and that's the Metzorah, which we're not going to talk about today. But the Tumas that we know about, or that we deal with today, such a person is allowed to enter the city of Yerushalayim. The issue comes up if you continue walking and you want to go inside the wall of the Har HaBayis. Now we have a new Kedusha, because outside the wall of the Har HaBayis is the Machane Yisrael. Inside the wall is Machane Leviah. The whole open area of the Har HaBayis is Machane Leviah. And there, a Tamei Meis can go. The Har HaBayis, the Rambam told us that a Zav, a Zava, a Nida, Yoledes can't go on anywhere in the Har HaBayis. A Tamei Meis can enter the wall of the Har HaBayis. The Tamei Meis, however, cannot go into the Chayil. You have that on your picture. It shows it by a red line. And certainly the Tamei Meis cannot go into the Ezras Noshim, and the Tavul Yom cannot go into the Ezras Noshim. And this begins the real Azora of the Machane Shechina. Outside the wall of the Har HaBayis, Machane Yisrael. Inside the wall of the Har HaBayis, the open area is Machane Leviah. The Ezras Noshim is really also Machane Leviah. But the Rabbanan said we're going to give it a semi-Kedusha of Azora. And that's this gold structure. And of course, there's the Chayil around it. The structure that the gate, the Chayil is the area closed off by the Soreg where Gentile or Tamei Meis couldn't go. And this is your biblical Azora in the blue, where Chas v'Shalom, a person that goes in there intentionally as a Tamei Meis is Chayev, the heavenly death. So this is the aerial view that we know about so far. There are other parts of the Beis Hamikdash that we're going to learn about as we go into the Masechta, because we're moving forward. We learned about the city of Yerushalayim. We've moved into the gate, one of the 5 gates. We've walked through one of the 5 gates to the Har HaBayis, which we now know as Machane Leviah. If we entered through the East Shushan Habira, we came to the Ezras Noshim. We entered the Ezras Noshim. We came to the 15 steps of Sha'ar Nikanor, and we can go into Sha'ar Nikanor right time at the right ritual purity status. And that's what we're up to. The Mishnah will continue with our walk into the Azora and what we'll get to.